Continue to join, but we want to go ahead and jump in and get started. We are going to be recording today's training so that other folks can access it in the future, but we plan to pause while you're doing group work or debriefing things so that you can feel free to be honest about any questions or challenges that you have. So let me share my screen and bring up our slides. There we go. Okay, so my name's Andrea Cooper. I go by Coop. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joined today by my business partner, Ann Doe, who also uses she, her pronouns. We are a part of March Strategies, which is a consulting firm that does advocacy, government, political consulting, as well as organizational develop and leadership development. We just transitioned our names, so you may have seen some emails that called us ALA Strategies, but we are now officially March Strategies. And we are really excited to be here today to talk about strategic planning and introduce some tools and an approach to doing planning. Both Ann and I have worked kind of at the intersection of advocacy, politics, and government our whole careers, as well as we've each served on nonprofit boards. So we've had the opportunity to see and be a part of a lot of planning. And really, quite frankly, as we thought about how to best support some of the organizations that we work with, like all of you, what we wanted to develop was a strategic planning process that was less burdensome, was faster to go through, and really focused on the process of planning and less on the product. I think a lot of people think about strategic planning and they think about what glossy document they're going to have to hand out afterwards. And I think what we've realized is that kind of misses the point. I think planning is an opportunity for yourself as a leader to get organized and think about your 2 to 3 year goals, but also to create an inclusive process that your teams, your board, and also your community can be a part of. So we really wanted to introduce some tools and an approach to planning for folks like you that are really busy but really do want to get organized and think a few years ahead. So that is what we're going to dive in on today. So our plan, we'll talk a little bit about why planning and this approach to it. We'll introduce the elements of a strategic plan, and then we're going to spend a lot of time walking through 3 tools that we think are really helpful in doing a planning process. I would also note here, if you already have a strategic plan, these tools could also be used to help you evaluate it, update it, start to think about a future strategic plan. So these tools are really designed to both jumpstart the process, but also they can be used midstream as well. We're going to talk a lot about developing and implementing your plan. That is the most important work. How do you actually get the work moving? And then we will also be building in some time to do practice. You'll get to spend some time in pairs, working together and getting to know one another as well. So in that spirit, we want to jump in, or before we jump in, wanted to ask folks to just put your name, pronouns, the organization you're with, and where you're located today into the chat so folks know who's on the line with us. Just some reminders, we do have 2 hours, so we're going to try to jam in a lot of content, but this will be recorded and we'll have some handouts and slides that will be available to you afterwards. If you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. Anne is going to help monitor that for me. Will have me pause at any point, but also we'll make sure that we spend a lot of time on questions as they come up. We are recording this, as I said, but we will pause at moments to make sure that you can ask any questions and be honest throughout. All right. So first and foremost, why planning? I won't spend too much time belaboring this point, but I do want to introduce the idea of why planning is important. I think for many of you on this call, and I know I've been in this place throughout my career, you know you need to plan, you just don't have the time to do it. Or you don't have the capacity or the people in your team that are ready to jump in. And so part of why we want to introduce this idea of planning is to help you figure out small ways where you can add this to your work to start to move the process forward. And sometimes putting a plan together is a way to help address other challenges that you might be having within your organization. So strategic planning allows for a few things. Definitely using limited resources well. It also can help you scale up work if new and unanticipated resources come in. This is a really key way to help you stay connected with the needs of your community by including folks in this process, but I think also pausing to think about and assess what are the needs of our community and what is our organization prepared to do well. I do want to acknowledge a lot of funders for grants, government, so forth, sometimes want a strategic plan or they want you to be able to articulate kind of what your long-term vision is and how you plan to get there. And so a plan and going through this process is a way to be able to do that easily and not, one grant at a time. And then planning also really helps you think ahead, both what you want to do and what you might anticipate happening. And so it allows your organizations to stay nimble and flexible, especially now when there are a lot of unknowns and challenges that are coming at us every single day, every single time you open the news. And obviously, I think the cost of not planning is an important thing to evaluate in this process. And I think one of the biggest is staff burnout, right? A lot of organizations have a mission and a vision, but the how of the work isn't quite articulated. And so what we experience as leaders and our staff experience as well is a sense of burnout because they're just going and reacting, and stepping back, writing a plan that is focused and prioritized can help folks feel like they know how to use their energy and the limited time and resources that we all have. I think it also helps ensure that there's alignment within your community when organizations providing similar or connected services have plans. It's a way of really assuring that all the gaps are being met for the folks that we serve. And there's not confusion on who's on first or duplicating of efforts or resources. And then it also helps to take advantage of or build on opportunities that are currently coming your way or could potentially come your way in the future. So the elements of our planning process are pretty straightforward. It's 5 key things that we think are critical for a strategic planning process. So first, we're not going to talk a ton today about vision, mission, and values. We know all of you have this. And if you would love tips and tricks about how to refine your vision and mission, we're happy to provide those offline. I just want to note that your vision and mission is something that you're going to want to continually reflect on throughout your strategic planning process. So it is an important thing to have available and make sure that you feel good about it before this process starts. The next section is, or the next process and step in the process is assessing and analyzing your organization as it currently is. This is really stepping back to identify what you're doing well, what you need to prepare for as you move the work forward. It's both kind of an internal look and an external look, and we'll talk about some tools to help do that process efficiently, but also including other folks. Then we're going to move to prioritizing and goal setting. So this is really how you bring focus to your work, right? Instead of doing a million things, we're going to really boil down what are the top 3 to 5 things we want to do well over the next 2 to 3 years, and how to think about setting realistic goals on how you're going to execute those priorities. And then we're going to talk about developing and implementing your plan. So what systems you need to have in place, how to think about taking an idea on paper to actual real work that is moving forward, and how to do that inclusively with your team members. We're going to talk about a few other resources and tools that are associated with planning. One that we're not going to dive into today, but I know there was recently a session on it, so I just wanted to emphasize it, is scenario planning. That is a really great part of strategic planning to help think through the unexpected. And there's other tools that we'll mention that I think are aligned with and can be a part of this process as well. But in the spirit of making this as straightforward as possible, we feel like the assessment analysis, prioritizing and goal setting, and then figuring out how the plan will be implemented are the most critical parts of planning. And if you can really think about a process and an approach to do that well, then you will be well on your way to getting a strategic plan in place. Always want to note also that planning is a team sport. I know many of you come from different sizes of organization. It might just be you and one other person. It might be a mighty team of 5 people. But regardless of your size, we want you to always consider that planning is a team sport. As an executive director, you will certainly lead this effort and be a key part of this effort, but we do not want you to do it alone. And in fact, you will do a better planning process if it's inclusive. So want to encourage you to think about how to engage your staff members, your board of directors, and community members and partners, including the folks that you serve in this planning process. Throughout this, we'll kind of flag when there are important times to bring folks in, but this will really be organization by organization. But want to encourage you to be thinking now, who can you bring into this process? It's not just on you. A plan shouldn't just be in your head. And we want to ensure it's responsive to the needs of your community by including them in the process. And then lastly, a few principles that we always think of at March Strategies anytime we're doing planning work are a few things I want to lift up. I think first is authenticity. People often think that the audience that is going to read a plan are funders, it's, your county government and so forth, and then they write it as such. We really want to encourage you to keep your plan authentic to how your organization runs, the work that you do, the language that you use, and the people that you serve. It is not helpful if your plan feels like a secondary thing on the outside. We really want it to be authentic to how you're doing your work and your vision and the values that your organization has. Again, I can't say this enough. We really want it to be centered, to be people and community centered. So finding ways to seek feedback and thoughts from your community is a really important part of making sure that your organization is not only meeting those needs, but I think advancing the vision that you have. Relationship based. So not only not doing this alone, but thinking about who can partner and support you in this process. And then, as always, we want to ensure that our planning is rooted in equity and inclusion, which we'll talk about, and also trauma informed, both the planning process and how we're going to move the work forward throughout it. And having some of those principles and values top of mind is always important as you walk through, as you begin and complete this process. All right, let me pause there and see, Anne, if there are any questions in the chat before I start to dive into some of our tools.
No questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to pipe up with anything, I don't see any hands.
All right, well, let's dive in. So the first section, as I mentioned, of a great planning process is to do the assessment and the analysis. We really want to figure out, as of today, where does your organization stand? And that is the foundation of figuring out where you need to go and what the work should look like moving forward. So a common way of doing this is a SWOT analysis that looks at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So this is really an honest and systemic tool to look at where your organization stands today. And I think it does this in 2 ways. First is an internal look. Strength and weaknesses is really internal to your organization. Opportunities and threats is external, right? So thinking about the community you're in, the state of government, right? What's happening around you is an important thing to analyze as well. And I think this process is especially important because it helps you identify what sets you apart from other organizations or service providers. Where are your resources plentiful or maybe limited? And it can help you spot opportunities and partnerships that you may not otherwise have thought about. So this, at a minimum, is a really great place to start. This is definitely a place where we want to encourage you to bring in other folks to help you kind of develop this snapshot for your organization. And the best way to do that is, I think, to walk through a few key questions so that you're not just kind of sitting in a room and listing off things. We want you to really think how to engage other folks in yourself and digging in on specifics. So a few ways to do that, and there's a few questions we'd encourage you to ask. Things like, what do community members say we do the best? What would we lose if we disappear? What our community lose if we disappeared today, right? So not just ticking off like we're really good at X, Y, Z skills, but really what is the need that we're addressing in our community and what do we do uniquely well as an organization? I think all of you on this provide a unique value in how you execute your work as well. And I think that would be a great thing to capture in your strengths. For weaknesses, it's those things that are keeping you up at night, right? Things, maybe it is skills that need to be developed within your organization. It could be a program that just hasn't quite kicked off in the way that you wanted it to. It could be changes that you're seeing in the folks that are accessing your services. So these are really things that are problems you're seeing, but I want you to really think about things that are in your control to solve, right? This is an internal assessment. This is a part of a planning process. So we don't want to just list everything that's difficult, but we really do want to lift up what are things that are not going well that with some time and attention, I might be able to turn around or partner with my board of directors to start to turn around. And then making the zoom out to the external analysis. So opportunities. So this is looking for shifts in trends. This is looking for partnership opportunities, opportunities to expand programming. There could be new research. There could be a shift in the tone and culture around the topics that you are working on. Those are all things that are important to capture because it'll help you analyze what is possible moving forward. And then the external threats, right? We unfortunately do this work in the context of everything else that is happening in the world. So thinking about external threats and how they may be a threat or have impact on your organization is what this part of the SWOT analysis is designed to do. So it's really thinking about what are shifts or changes that might be happening in your region. What are shifts or changes that are happening with funders? Right. I think the very big obvious one that I know is impacting a lot of you is revenue streams in the state government are changing, right? That is an impending threat, but you all have time to think about how you can adjust to that coming online. And for threats, we're looking for immediate risks as well as zooming out to the long-term vulnerabilities. And this is another place we're bringing outside folks like other community members. I think board of directors oftentimes are helpful with this too, because they're kind of thinking outside of your day-to-day work and thinking about what are those things and how do they relate to your organization. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of really thinking and through the context of what is in your control to do something about it. Coming up with a list of everything that's bad in the world not only is awful, won't feel good, but it's not going to help move your plan and your work forward. So really think about internally and externally, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats through the lens of what you can control or attempt to try to control. And then the SWOT analysis, kind of just best practices. It's really important to be realistic and honest. So both about your strengths and what you're doing really well, but also any limitations and being willing to put those on the table without shame. Your limitation might be someone else's strength. And I think that is also where partnerships can pop up and evolve. Getting multiple perspectives, as we've said, really wanting to understand how do other people receive your services? What do they see as your value in this work and in this community is a critical part of assessing where you are and where you can be. Also prioritizing impact. And what I mean by this is, again, not listing every single thing you can come up with, but impactful things. So things that will happen for good or bad that will impact how you execute and do your work and serve your community. So really thinking about impact as a filter, I think is helpful. SWOT analysis is time bound. So it really is a snapshot of where your organization is at a set of time. So I would encourage you to do this at least annually. If you already have a strategic plan and you're thinking about how to update it, or perhaps it's not on track, the first place I would start is a SWOT analysis and really stepping back and thinking about the state of your organization and how you are being impacted by what's happening externally as well. And then lastly, you'll hear this theme a lot throughout this, but getting as specific as possible, because specificity helps you actually move ideas forward into actions, right? So it helps you boil down to exactly what needs to happen next rather than kind of broad things. Specificity also helps make your plan inclusive to a lot of other people. Limited funding, improving programs, things like that mean something to me, and it might mean something different to you. So specificity helps ensure that everyone across your organization and anyone who is interacting with your strategic plan is operating with the same underlying understanding. Okay, so once you've done the SWOT analysis, I think a secondary tool that I think is really critical is what we like to call kind of SWOT 2.0. So this is where you move from what is, so understanding where your organization currently is, to what
We
it
have
could
a
be.
question from Brian, just a raised
Cool.
hand before we go too far.
Great.
Go ahead, Brian.
Try and jump in.
Hi, sorry. When it comes to the SWOT analysis and balancing that, doing it annually, making sure it gets done, being specific, that kind of thing. When you guys are doing it, who are you involving to do that analysis itself?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So I think this definitely depends on the size of your organization, but I, at a minimum, would say at least one or two other staff folks if you have them. And I would think of people who are helping drive work that is kind of organization wide. I do think it's helpful if you have engaged board members. I think they have a 50-foot view that and a connection to your organization that is helpful. They are not thinking day to day in the work like you are. And so I think that perspective is helpful. I haven't always necessarily brought community members into the room to walk through a SWOT analysis, but you might grab coffee with a few people and say, hey, I'm starting my planning process. I would just love to hear your feedback on what you think we're doing well and where we can improve, or what you're hearing out as things that are happening out in the community. So those are some ways to go about it, but I do think it depends on how engaged, especially your board traditionally is in your work, and the trust that exists there to give helpful feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions before we jump on? Okay. I'll keep trucking ahead. So, as I was saying, the next step of the SWOT analysis is really tying things together. So it goes from almost being an assessment and that snapshot to what you can do about it. So what you could be, what your organization aims to be. So one way to do that is to combine those boxes together, and in a way that helps you think strategically about what to do next. So as this kind of lays out, the connections should be with your strengths and your opportunities. So this is really strategies that you can think of that will help you leverage your strongest assets. So what are we doing well as an organization so that we can better take advantage of the opportunities that we listed or that we've identified, right? Starting from the place of strength, building on what you're doing successful is a theme that you will hear over and over again. That should be a priority, rather than trying to always, assess and try to fix things, if you will. So starting from a place of strength to take advantage of opportunities. Next would be shoring up your weaknesses to take advantage of opportunities. So this would be, hey, there's something that is not quite right within our organization, and we are missing the chance to do an opportunity that is right there. An example here could be my board isn't engaged enough, right? This is the second year in a row. We've had a lot of turnover. We haven't had the engagement we want, which means we're missing out on funding opportunities. We're missing out on partnerships, right? This could be a big strategy that you want to take on as an organization in the next 2 years, because the result of shoring up that weakness or focusing on that weakness will help bring about a lot of opportunity, help you take advantage of opportunities for your organization. Then we want to move to building on your strengths again to defend against threats. Threats are oftentimes going to happen no matter what. But stepping back to think about what we do well that will help lessen the impact of this threat, right? So a really common one right now is organizations are overly dependent on one or two funding sources. But perhaps the strength that you have is a board member who is really well connected in your community. How can you connect those things to get out ahead of that threat? And thinking in a year or 2 years out is particularly helpful when thinking about strengths and threats. And then I think the last one is trying to shore up your weakness to defend against threats. I think the order of this really does matter to me. You want to build from strengths and opportunities to dealing with threats. And I say that because I think focusing too much on your weaknesses and threats can take you down a rabbit hole that is not as productive. It's important to recognize them. It's important to know what you do and don't do well and how that might impact your ability to kind of withstand some of those threats. But so much of it is out of your control that I don't want you to obsess over this part. So naming it, knowing it is important, and then thinking again about, okay, if we have a weakness that we're aware of or the community has made us aware of, what can we do about it in the short term, using a limited amount of resources to try to defend. I think the most important thing here, to be really honest with you, is thinking about what assistance do we need and what partnership could we lean into, which is actually an opportunity to help defend against some of these pending threats. So that is the assessment. I want to pause again and just see if there's any questions about how to combine both the initial SWOT analysis and taking it to thinking strategically about how to address your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. All right. Okay. Well, we're going to practice this for a little bit, so maybe other questions will pop up and we'll have some time to discuss. I think it's always helpful to take from the theoretical that I'm introducing and actually make it real for you and your organization and the work that you're doing. So what we're going to do now is break into pairs. And what I'm going to have you do is spend about 5 minutes on your own choosing a box. So if you want to think about your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, or your threats, I'll let you choose which one. I want you to spend about 5 minutes thinking about how you would brainstorm that list. So asking yourself some of these questions, if you will. And then in your pairs, I want you to each take time sharing and kind of talking through what you came up with. And if you're in one of the pair kind of listening, if you have thoughts or feedback, you're welcome to share that as well. So we'll do these these pairs, excuse me, for about 15 minutes. I want to encourage you to start by introducing yourselves, of course. Take a little time to brainstorm on your own, and then begin your sharing process. And I think Devin's going to help us set up the rooms.
The breakout rooms.
Yes.
So try. Pause
And we'll
our
see you back in an assessment of where our organization is. And now it's time to transition that into our planning work. So we're going to talk about prioritizing and goal setting and how to make sure that the priorities that we're coming up with are actionable and it's work that we can move forward in a 2-year time period. So quickly, why we prioritize and do this work. I think a number of reasons, but a few that I wanted to emphasize is having priorities, right? And by that, I mean the really common phrase, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. If your organization says we do what people need, unfortunately, that might not be able mean that you're able to do the work right or to the best of your ability, right? So priorities are really figuring out, here are the 3 things that we are going to lift up in this next 2 or 3 years that we're going to just nail it. We're going to put a lot of energy behind it. We're going to move resources to executing it, right? So when I say a priority, that's what I mean. And it is getting focus around your priorities so that you have the time and capacity to do it well. So prioritizing allows us to really have an honest assessment about what we can achieve and what we can deliver on in your community and for your various clients. It's a way, obviously, of being resource conscious. If you have limited time, money, and people, having clear priorities tells you where that time, money, and people should go rather than trying to stretch it out. This is especially important, I can't emphasize enough, for staff capacity. You all and as individuals on this call and the teams that you work with, no doubt feel stretched at capacity. I think that is the unfortunate reality of the type of work that you all do. And so having priority allows your teams and your organization to have focus and to know where their efforts should be put in rather than trying to do a million different things or constantly responding to external requests to do things. So prioritizing really helps your team stay grounded in what you all and the work that you're moving forward. It helps you say no. I think one of the hardest things, especially when you're provided a grant, when a community comes to you and says, hey, you all have the infrastructure to do this, you have to do this. It is very difficult to say no. And what happens is suddenly your organization and the programs that you're executing are growing, but your staff might not be. And your budget might only be growing in one area and not another. So having really clear, thoughtful priorities allows you to say no to other work and not, no, we don't want to do it, or no, we don't care. It allows you to pivot and say, hey, you know what? These are the 3 priorities that our team and our community decided we're going to move forward this year. And we've got to put all our energy into that. We'd love to revisit this when we do planning in the future, right? So it kind of gives you the positive spin on why you're saying no to other things. And then having priorities also allows you to be responsive to community needs. It gives people something to react to. It gives people something to engage with when it's really clear what the work you all are aiming to do for the next 2 years is. And I think it provides the opportunity for partnerships when it's very clear what your focus as an organization is going to be. So if there's one takeaway that I would say from this section, it is priorities equal focus, and it allows your work to be focused on a few key things that you're going to do really, really well. So just quickly, kind of what are strategic priorities and what are they not? There's a number of things up here, but it is not a laundry list of every single thing that your organization's going to do. That is not what you want in your strategic plan and your strategic priorities. So this is not about reflecting every single thing your organization does, but it is about lifting up a few key projects or initiatives or things that you're going to move forward over a longer period of time. So a 2 or 3 year time period. So you don't need to list all of your daily operations in this plan. An analogy that is often used to describe this is, think of your organization like a garden, right? You're going to water everything in your garden, but there might be a few plants where you're adding fertilizer or you're moving it so it's in the sun, and you're really putting extra effort behind it and maybe even extra resources to help to make sure it thrives. So that is really what we mean when we're thinking about strategic priorities and what should be lifted up in your strategic plan. So most importantly is how do you develop those priorities? How do you decide on 3 to 5, which can be a really frustrating and difficult process because there's so much important work to be done. But I think going through a thoughtful process that includes other folks is a way to get there and to come out of it, not only having reflected on your organizational analysis, but also helping to meet the needs of your community. So we've identified kind of 4 key steps to doing this, and it really is like a funnel. So that shape is not just a pretty graphic, it's intentional. The idea is to go really broad and then start to slowly get more focus, but to do it using kind of thoughtful steps to help get there. And I'm going to walk through each of these, but in essence, it is starting with a list of everything that you could or want to do that is related to your vision and mission, first and foremost, and meets the needs of your clients. And at this point, it is okay if it results in a really long list. At this point, definitely encourage you to have a group of folks engaged that includes community board staff, because it is helpful to hear different ideas. Always make sure those ideas are tied to your vision and mission so that you are staying true to what it is that you aim, the work you aim to do as an organization, and make sure that you're also reflecting on your SWOT analysis. That is, I think, an important tool to have in the room to help, put some framework behind people's ideas and dreaming big. The next step is to evaluate and categorize, and we'll introduce some tools on how to do this. But this is really thinking about, hey, is this moving our mission forward? Is it not? Is this work we should be doing? Is it work someone else should be doing, right? It's going through questions about your capacity and resources to help develop the list. And then we're going to refine it. So we're going to get to that 3 to 5. And there's other tools that we can bring into this, but this is really where the decision making happens. And I would encourage you to think about who's a part of that, right? Is it on you as the executive director? Do you have a leadership team? Are you including your board or your board chair? Who is going to help you make those final decisions? And that might be a different group than the people who helped you dream big. And that is totally fine as well. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how do you take a list of things and actually turn it into actions and a plan to implement. All right, so for the dreaming big process, like I said, great way to engage a lot of folks, similar to the SWOT analysis. Do it in a way that's manageable to you, obviously, and your capacity. But here are some ways in which I would frame the question to people. And then this also ties back to your SWOT analysis. So really thinking through those weaknesses and threats. Those are problems that might be popping up. Thinking through a process of what is a solution to that problem, and is that a priority that we want to take on? That is a way to generate some ideas. Building on your success. If there's nothing else that you did, I would ask that you do this. Really reflecting on what are we doing well? What are our strengths? What programs have we seen be very successful? What is a need in our community that we are directly addressing, and we perhaps are the only ones addressing it? And how could we build on that? Like, what does phase 2 look like? Is a really, really great way to draft your priorities and build a plan. And then leaning back on your organizational vision. So an organizational vision is designed to be lofty and big and inspiring. But I think reflecting on that of like, what is the next step to keep us moving towards that vision, right? And what are some concrete things that we could do in the next 2 to 3 years to start to continue to make progress is another way to generate those ideas. So once you've had the opportunity to dream big, and if you've included other folks in that process, I want to invite you to put things into categories. So to start to organize those ideas and those priorities that were lifted up. The ones on the screen right now, these are just examples that I came up with. I would really encourage you to think about your day-to-day work and what buckets they fit into, right? So it might be program delivery, internal, right? If you own a building, that might be something that you're thinking about, right? So really make this reflect how your organization delivers its work, and the mission that you all have, but try to fit those priorities into these different categories. What I found really helpful about this step is this will initially off the bat help you realize like, oh, that is actually not a priority for us, right? It's a great idea. It's something we would love to see happen. But if it doesn't fit into how we currently do our work, then it's not for us. And it's maybe an idea for someone else. So categorizing allows you to kind of start that filtering process. It helps you to also think about where you might have gaps. So let's say you have a ton of categories or a ton of priorities in one category, like organizational capacity, and none in community engagement. That might be an opportunity to think about what could we narrow in this category and add in here? Or are we comfortable with that? Are we okay for the next 2 or 3 years not focusing so much on community engagement? So this is really making intentional choices as you narrow your priorities from a big list to try to get to those 3 to 5. And then this is a really critical and I will say challenging part. And so I want to emphasize again, like this is the decision-making time, and you should be really thoughtful about who you want engaging with you. I think it is okay if you are the executive director, if you're the decision maker from your organization, to go through this on your own. I think it's great to also ask for feedback. I would not do this process with 25 people in the room. That's really, really challenging. But this is a critical part of identifying that focus and getting your priorities that you're going to want to walk through. And it is really asking yourself these 5 key questions to help assess if these priorities are ready to move forward on now, or perhaps it's something that we will revisit into the future. And you really want to make sure that your priority can address all 5. So the first is mission alignment. Does this directly advance your organization's purpose, right? Does this move you towards your vision, like we talked about? I cannot tell you how often you'll come out of these brainstorming sessions and have a huge list. And while they are good and important ideas that are related to the services you provide, they're taking you away from what you do well, or what makes you unique, or the specific need that you're meeting in your community. So this is a way of just saying, like, not every great idea is an actionable idea, or not every great idea is something that my organization has to move forward. I know that is really challenging when we are talking about real humans and providing services that people really need. But again, the point of this process and a big part of planning is figuring out what you are going to do well, because that will have a larger impact on someone's life than trying to do a ton of things and kind of doing an okay job of it, right? More importantly, I think this also helps your team move the work forward in a way that is more sustainable, which over the long run will also really help and impact people's lives. So mission alignment is intentionally the first question, and I think it's a really, really important filter to go through. Secondly, leveraging your strengths. I warned you I was going to repeat this over and over again, but organizations should always be building from what they do well. Trying to write a plan that is addressing everything that you're not doing well is not possible and really overwhelming. And what your community needs is for you to keep doing what you do well. So really be intentional about making sure you're leveraging that and staying focused on that. Is it addressing a critical need, right? Go through the threats that you outlined on your SWOT analysis and see what are also the threats to the folks we serve right now. And are we helping address that? Don't get out of your mission alignment, right? Stay with your mission alignment, but is this actually addressing a need we've heard from the folks that we serve, or we've heard from the community? And if not, I would definitely table it. There's too much need and too much to do to just have ideas that are disconnected from the needs that we're hearing from community. Is it a realistic use of resources? And this includes time, staff, and money. So sometimes you'll get to this point and realize, unless we get a grant, we can't do this. Unless we cut something else, we can afford to do this. Unless we can hire more people, we can't do this. That is okay. And it just means you can't do it right now. So a realistic use of resources is really critical to decide if a priority should be in your plan and if it should move forward. Because you do not want to figure out 8 months down the road that those resources are not enough, and you've already started the work. And then can you do it in a meaningful time period? So your strategic plan is ideally a 2-year plan. Some people make it a 3-year plan. I think it really depends on what your funding cycle looks like. But are you going to see progress on this priority in a 2-year time period? Or is this really something that you want to keep on the back burner and keep revisiting and thinking about, but it's really a 3 or 5-year vision or something that we would love to see happening in the next decade? So I think being honest about both the resources and the time it's going to take to achieve things. So this is a really important part of planning and decision making. And so I think thinking ahead as you start this process of when you as a leader, when your leadership team will have the time and capacity to think through these questions, I think is also really important. We want our strategic planning process to be efficient, but we also want to leave ourselves the time to really think through these in thoughtful ways in advance. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's questions or comments. All right. I'm not seeing or hearing none. I'm going to keep trucking away. Okay, so I am going to invite folks to do a little bit of this process right now. We're going to stay in this group setting again, and then we'll have the opportunity to share out. But what I'm going to invite you to do is start thinking about your dream big list. So what are the 8 or 10 priorities that come to mind right now? And I want you to make sure you're reflecting on the SWOT analysis that you just did. I know it's not complete and it's only your thinking, but you're here today. So let's get started. So starting to list your 8 to 10, then I want you to start brainstorming who would you want to be a part of your dream big process? Who feels essential? Who is helpful? Who are some community partners that you want to bring in? Other organizations perhaps could be too. So brainstorming who that is. And then lastly, when can that happen? If you were to decide, okay, I'm going to begin this strategic planning process, this is a key critical step once we've done our SWOT analysis. When does it make sense, right? When is maybe your budget complete in the next few months? When are some grants done? Like when will you have the capacity to start this process so you can start to think of a goal in mind to get this kicked off? So I'm going to give folks 10 minutes again to get this started, and then we will come back and hear how it went and answer any questions. All right, so moving to the kind of the final part of this funnel, if you will, in this process is how do you really make your priorities more than just ideas and actions and things that and work that can actually move forward. So I want to start by asking a question, and anyone can come off mute. What is wrong with these priorities as they're listed?
They're too broad.
Very broad. Anything else?
I mean, there's no timeline, there's no specifics, there's no like it's not a measurable thing. Like
Absolutely. Yeah, if you look at these, any organization could say this, right? Like every single one of you on this call could probably say you want to or could do this. It doesn't tell anything about who you're serving, your community, but most importantly, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it by, and so forth. So this, I would say, is more common than you would think in a planning process. And so we want to just kind of walk through how to start to make things more specific and, more importantly, actionable. And by that, I mean folks like you and your team and so forth can actually move work forward based on the priorities that you identified. So one way to do that is this formula. I think it's pretty basic and straightforward about how to take ideas to actual strategies or strategic priorities, I should say. And it's kind of taking it through this step. So action, what will you actually do? So thinking about a verb, a word that actually shows the intent behind the priority or the idea, gets as specific and focused as possible and concrete. So what part of your programs, who is it going to serve, so forth, helps to bring that focus. And I think this is really, really important, the outcome. So why does this matter and what is going to change once you've taken this priority on? This really helps us figure out, like, why are we doing this, right? And throughout as we're executing our plan and doing the work, being able to reflect back on what is it that we are focused on achieving, like what is the outcome we're working towards, is really, really important. So that could be the benefit to the folks you serve, to your community, to a specific program even, but you really want to know what is the outcome of this priority. So taking this really horrible example of improve our programs, and thinking about it differently to kind of model, right? Instead of just improve programs, we actually want to expand our program. And I might actually suggest putting more words here, right? By what percentage? How many more folks do you want to go through it, right? What does expand mean? The focus, it's a specific program. So we're focusing on youth. It's our mentorship program. And that is the program that we want to expand. And then the outcome would be to increase our youth engagement, which would also reduce recidivism, et cetera, right? So this is just adding more flavor. To this, I would also add date, perhaps. I would add more measurements, but this is just an example to get to kind of paint the picture of how you move from this to this, right? And make sure that we are really thinking in more specificity, but also what the outcome of taking on this work and moving it forward will be. And I want to just note, this is not about wordsmithing. This is not about, better words on paper. This is really about clarity and alignment. In addition to it being one other way of assessing if this is work you should take on, if you can't articulate an outcome, that's an important pause to say, like, maybe this isn't ready for us to start on yet, right? Maybe we put pause on this and start working on a few other things. But I think more importantly, spelling those pieces out, the focus and the outcome in particular, help to make the work clear to your staff and to your community, right? What are we actually going to do? It also helps your team know, are we all aligned on what this priority is going to look like? And I think it also helps make a more compelling case on the off chance that you are needing to use this to seek funding or get a grant or something like that. But this middle part of giving clear direction and specificity, so there's alignment within your team, is the most important reason to go through that. It's not just pretty words, it's really specificity for alignment. Okay, so once we have our priorities, to Laura's point, we want to continue to add the detail of how we're going to move it forward. This is really the planning piece of this work. What is actually going to happen next? What needs to happen next to move this priority from an idea to actually work that's in services that are moving forward? So I wanted to start just by being super clear about the difference between a priority and a goal. A few ways to think of this. The priority is the what, right? It's the definition or the destination, excuse me. And your goal is your map to get there. So how are you going to do things in order to achieve this priority? And the how is a key part of the planning work and thinking through in great detail about what actions need to happen, what's the timeline, what are the resources needed, what are the measurable outcomes that we're coming up with. So that is the distinction between a priority and a goal. Here's an example. This priority example is not the best, but it's what we have. But more importantly, seeing how a priority relates to, 3 specific goals. You might have 5 goals that are aligned with this. But what you see in this example is we have specificity about other community organizations. We have a date. We want to establish partnerships, right? We want to see 40% enrollment increase. We're getting specific in how we are talking about the goals. Another tool that folks might be familiar with, but we would be remiss if we did not lift it up, is making sure that your goals follow the model of SMARTY goals. So this is kind of a filter that you can use to assess, are our goals specific enough? Are our goals really thinking through all of the important things that we will need in order to execute this priority? This is a tool I want to also note that we use, and we have founded from the Management Center, which is an organization that focuses on supporting leaders of social justice and nonprofit organizations. So credit to them for thinking through this model and these definitions. But really quickly, this really helps you think about is your goal strategic? Is it clear what you'll accomplish? Is it measurable? So can you track progress and know when it's done? Is it realistic? Is always something that you're going to constantly be asking yourself in terms of resources, capacity, and your ability to achieve it. Very similarly, is it time bound, right? Is there a clear deadline, and is that deadline something that you can achieve and that fits within your 2 to 3 year plan? And then I think 2 additions. I think oftentimes people talk about SMART goals, and SMARTY are 2, I think, important additions, because we want to bring in inclusion and equity. So are we ensuring that we are centering the folks impacted in our goals and in our priorities, quite frankly, right? Are we lifting up those voices in this process in both how we do the work and how we develop our plan? And then are we considering equity in every way, right? So is this decreasing barriers? Are we thinking through barriers that exist for some folks but not others, and so forth? So this kind of framework and this acronym is really important for your goals. I would argue you could also think of it for your priorities as well, but at a minimum, would encourage you to use it as you're putting your plan together. Okay, so we are going to quickly kind of walk through developing and implementing your strategic plan. And one word that I want to emphasize is not on here is writing it. It is important that a plan is written down, and I want to be really clear on that. A plan in your head is not a strategic plan. It is thoughts in your head, right? So having something in writing that other people can see and reflect on is really critical. I just find that people focus way too much on that, and they get so lost in what the document's going to look like and the words that it takes longer than it should, and the emphasis and your energy is on the wrong thing. So what we want to encourage you to do is focus less on writing it and more on the process of moving the work forward, right? How are you going to take these great ideas that were thoughtful and strategic and based on an analysis and actually make them real? A key way to do that is to utilize champions. So if you have 3 priorities, 3 strategic priorities, each priority should have someone who is a champion of that priority, meaning they own the work. They're going to kind of be the person who's thinking day in and day out about it. This could be a program staff. This could be you and your co-director. This could be you and your board chair, right? But ideally, no one person is owning 3 priorities. And you should scale this up or down based on the size of your organization. If you are a really small organization, maybe 1 or 2 priorities for the next year is fine. But really making sure a person kind of owns the implementation and the next steps, and identifying who those are. And the role of a champion is a number of things, and this is where they could literally start writing these pieces out, but most important, it's that these are thought through. So they are the person who's really identifying what are the metrics for success. So what are the measurable things? What are the next tasks or actions that need to happen to accomplish the goals that we've laid out? And what are key milestones, right? If we have a 2-year plan and by the end of that plan, we want to have accomplished this priority, what are key points along the way that will tell us that we are moving in the right direction? They're going to help think through resources. So how much will accomplishing this priority cost? How much staff time do we need? Any other materials that we don't currently have, right? That could be infrastructure, that could be technology. And then a part of this that I really love and I think is fun and important is what partnerships do we need, right? Who else can we work with on that? Maybe it's another organization, maybe it's a county, maybe we're bringing in some contractors, maybe we're partnering with another organization. I think that is a really important resource to think through. How are we going to monitor the progress of this, right? This is how we take a plan from something you write and share in a Google folder and never look at again and turn it into something you're moving and acting on by monitoring it and making sure that we're assessing if we're on track, if we're meeting our goals. And most importantly, we want to celebrate our success and make sure that we're communicating organization-wide and community-wide about our progress towards it. That helps create momentum. That helps bring people into the process as well. And then we want to do a risk assessment. So this is a tool that we'll provide in a handout form for you to think about more about. But a risk assessment is a way of really considering anything that possibly could go wrong, things that you want to be prepared for as you move forward to execute this. Maybe it's, the risk of funding going away or something else happening that could make it challenging to move this strategic priority. Scenario planning is another really great way to do this and a tool to bring in for a champion to think about. What are various scenarios I want to consider before we begin this work of moving the priority forward? But this is really where a champion comes in, and you could have maybe 3 different champions or 3 folks who are owning a priority. And on a monthly basis, you come together to check in and say, okay, what is the progress we're making? What are the resource needs we have, and so forth. So really, one person owns it, but it can become a team project. I'm going to go really quickly over this, but Mocha is a planning tool for teams. So the champion of a priority is likely going to be the person who owns it. And then these other roles are just helping that person identify, like, who else do I need involved in this, right, to move this priority forward? If I came up with all of these goals and tasks, who's going to do the work with me? And this is a really cool tool that also is from the Management Center that helps you kind of thoughtfully think about who do I need to be consulting and talking with and bringing in at key moments. Who's a helper maybe that is going to be working day to day on this? And then who's approving things? Is it your board? Is it the executive director? Is it someone else? So thinking through this as you start to move the work forward is just a cool tool that we like to use, especially on organization-wide efforts. And then the last piece of kind of developing and implementing your plan is thinking in advance of what does success look like for your overall plan. So how do you know that your plan is on track and that it is working, right? We don't want to just write it, put it away and start working. We want to revisit what our goals were and if we're achieving them. We want to revisit why our priorities are what they are. And so an important part is just making sure that you think in advance, like, what are our measurements of success? That might be how many folks are utilizing a service, how many people are coming into a program. If your goal was to increase it, how close are you to achieving that? So thinking of that in advance, but then also being intentional about finding the time to actually evaluate how are you doing towards meeting those success indicators. And this is a way of kind of thinking about different types of success indicators. So it might be related to a program, it might be your organizational health, or it could be centered in your community as well. So these are things that you can include to help measure if your plan is on track. All right, before we get to some resources and tools, just want to pause and see if there are any questions or comments. I know I went a little fast at the end part, but we can certainly pause and revisit anything. Okay. All right. Well, I think one additional thing that we wanted to make, we have like thrown a lot at you. We could do probably 8 hours of strategic planning and we did it in 2. But I think what is most important that we wanted to make sure we left with folks was some tools to get this started and some tools to help all of you take this back to your organization and community and begin the process. So what we're going to put into the chat, and we will also email it, or Devin will email it to folks after, is a workbook that we put together. Where is it? Hold on. There we go. Can everyone see that on the screen? Okay, cool. So this is, I think it's like a 30-page workbook that takes elements of what we just did and kind of either creates handouts or just is kind of a reminder of the flow of the process. And this is really designed to use in a few ways. You can individually use it and start working on pieces of this. Like maybe you want to find time once a week where you're going to think about planning for 2 hours and you could pull this out and start working on these aspects of it. Maybe you want to print this, get your team in a room and start working on it together. Maybe you want to have a retreat and you all go away for a week and a half. This is kind of designed to help you pick the tools that are helpful for you and kind of chip away at your plan. We want to recognize that you all do not have, 10 hours a week to think about strategic planning, but we want to encourage you to start to find some time to chip away at parts of it and then also find ways to bring other people into it. And we recognize those folks weren't on this, the Zoom today. So this is just a way to do that. So it has all the tools we've introduced and it's kind of in the same order of how we walked through things today. So you are welcome to share this with your teams as well. You'll have it in electronic. As always with all of our tools, we just ask that you not put it on the internet. We work with this very specific type of clientele. And so we just want to make sure folks we're not interested in helping, don't have our tools, but all of you are people that we want to make sure have these available. This also includes, that's what I was scrolling towards, sorry to make you seasick. This also includes a template. So as we've said throughout, the written part of this is not as strategic, as important as like the key elements of a plan. And so we just wanted to give you a template so that you could start to write this once you've gone through the analysis and the thinking in a way that makes sense to share it with others. We also turned it into a Google Doc. So we'll put that in the chat and send it out. And you can just copy the Google Doc and start plugging away and share it with other people internally too. But it kind of includes the format of what we just laid out over the last few hours. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out is there's a few other tools that can help with specifically decision-making on your plan, getting from a lot of great ideas and opportunities to 3 priorities is for sure the hardest part of planning. It is really daunting to feel like you have to make those decisions. So the tools that we talked about today are the first place to go. But I think if you need additional help thinking through how to narrow or how to get alignment on your amongst your team or amongst your board of directors, there are a few other tools to think about as well. One I really like to use is impact versus and feasibility. So it's really helping you chart out what is the impact that this priority could have and how possible is it for us to achieve it. And so if you have a list of say 7 and you chart them out, you can kind of start to see like you know what, this actually is not going to have the impact to the folks we serve that we think it is, or this is going to be high impact, but it's going to take a lot of capacity. And is that something that we're willing to sign up for? So this is kind of just a visual way of mapping those things with folks in your team to help make decisions. We talked about MOCA, so there's more detail here. And then we didn't have a chance to talk today, and I'm sure this probably came up in scenario planning too, but this is just kind of a way to think through risk assessment. So whoever's championing this any priority might want to use this handout to really think through what are some of the risks associated with it, and then most importantly, what can we do about those risks? What can we try to get out ahead of? And have contingency plans, or what do we just have to accept is a risk that we're taking on and do it eyes wide open? So that is the workbook. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if we have any questions or comments. We have about 10 minutes left, so happy to take any questions that we can.
I guess one question that's coming up for me when I'm thinking about like implementing these ideas is kind of like when is the time in the process to incorporate other people into the planning?
Yeah.
You know, obviously talked about some benefits and downsides to both, not having too many people in the planning process, but also not wanting to just take on the whole planning yourself, right, and be siloed in that. So just wondering, you know, if you could speak to that just a little bit more maybe. Yeah,
absolutely. I think what is most important is to figure out who internally to your organization you want to be a part of it. And so I think that would just be having, you know, being super transparent with your team that it's a process that's going to start, and getting feedback on who feels it's essential they're involved. I found that oftentimes like any program staff will probably definitely want to be involved because they feel like you're going to create work for me and I want to know what it is. Operations and admin staff may not want to be, right? So I think that's a place to start depending on the size of your organization. The next place I would go is your board of directors, if you have a board of directors. I think this is a really organization by organization decision. Some boards are made up of folks who very well could work in your organization or really connected in your community. Other boards are not, right? And so if it's the former, I would really think through who on your board has the capacity to do this. I don't think it needs to be certain titles. It really is a capacity question to be a part of the process and to do it thoughtfully. And then the last is community members. So I would say anyone that you have a desire to partner with, I would ask if they have capacity, or people who you feel like your work is very similar or overlapping, because that is a place where you all can kind of sit down together and figure out how are we making sure we're not duplicating efforts, and also how are we making sure our priorities maybe are connected or building on each other is a way to do that. But the community part, I think, is the hardest because it could get way too many voices and way too many people quickly. So it's kind of a case by case issue, but I would start with that lens of partnership and a desire to partner.
And I think the only thing I would add is there are a lot of different places that you could slot folks in to include them, which isn't like putting them in the entire process, right? So you can, like, I think it was modeled really well earlier where you're thinking about assessing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then having an external partner be able to reflect to you maybe things that you can't see for yourself is like an interesting place to bring folks in, or maybe be like, when you have your strategic priorities in place, be sharing some of those things as you're having conversations and thinking about partnership. Similar for like different people within your organization. You know, I think thinking about where it makes sense to plug folks in at what parts in the process. Do you want them for the whole process? Do you want them for pieces of it, to help sort of manage that workflow too, based on what works for your organization?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Hi, question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That wasn't my question. Do you also work with organizations through this process? And if so, how do we get your info to what to do about that?
Yes, we do. Our emails are in the workbook, but we'll put them in the chat. Actually, we're gonna put our emails in the chat and use those emails. We are in the process of switching. So both will get to us, but let's use our there we go. Thank you, Anne. And yes, we do help. I think our biggest support is like facilitating these types of conversations or working with you if you're the director or any program staff kind of on their pieces to help flesh it out. We don't write them, like we think people charge way too much to produce pretty documents. So we don't do that piece of it, but we are happy to help with the facilitation and the strategy.
Oop, did you want to share a little bit about office hours after this?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh man, thank you. So, as a part of the work that we are doing with HJRA, in addition to this training and the workbook, we are also going to be available throughout July for office hours. So we will, or Devin will send around a link where you can sign up for time with me and Ann, or just me or Ann, to talk more specifically about either the process of planning and how to help start that, or actually going through elements of your plan. So we will have those office hours available, and thank you to HCR for making that possible. Laura, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, and thank you to HJR. Thank you, Devin.
Thank you.
Summer is killing me, y'all. These summer camp drop-offs and pickups, and like I'm just dying over but I just really appreciate it a lot. I really liked the Smarty goals. I liked because the SMART goals I've heard a ton, but the Smarty goals is great. I did want to talk a little bit about weaknesses because I have a lot of community partners that I partner with. And oftentimes people love to give unsolicited advice.
Mhm.
And what is a good way to tell people, like, we are a very small organization. We don't have the capacity to do that without
Mhm.
sounding like we're a very small organization with no capacity.
Yep. I think that's a great question. So I think first, based on your capacity, that should really drive how much feedback you seek. Because I think you know what you might be walking into if you ask too many people in too many groups for their feedback on your programming. You could also think about specifically, are you asking for feedback? Or are you asking for reaction? And reaction might be also another way of seeking kind of input, but it's kind of saying like, hey, these are the 5 we've decided, and we want feedback on how to narrow to 3 to 2. So it's not opening the door for a ton of ideas, but it is still kind of getting thoughtful feedback on the process. I think generally, like, my rule of thumb on feedback is it's going to sound a little direct, but I think it's important. Not all feedback is helpful.
Right.
When you're seeking feedback, what you're looking for, I think, are 2 things. Patterns of feedback. So have a lot of people said the same thing. And if you see a pattern, I think that is worth thinking like, okay, everyone is asking us to do this, or everyone is telling us perhaps it's a weakness we have. That's when my brain says, I need to pay attention. Like there's something happening I'm not seeing. So seeking patterns is more important than any one individual's opinion. And then the second is it in your control to do something about it? Right. You're going to hear a lot of folks who, especially because the moment we're living in, want you to do work that's responsive to that. And that's just not your job. Right. And it's an unfortunate reality that we live in. But I think always pivoting back to what your mission is,
Right.
is a helpful way to execute that. But I think thinking in advance of how many people you're going to bring into the process helps too.
Well, and I guess I'm thinking about not even like when I solicited feedback. This is just kind like people in, so we're a very, very tiny housing organization, and we have
Mhm.
like very small staff. And these are people who come from much larger organizations who are like, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? And
Mm,
how do I respond without just being like, no?
yeah.
Like, I, I just don't know. I'm a very direct person and I
Yeah.
don't want to like, I want to get more professional in the way I say things, if that makes sense. And not
Yeah.
just be like, no, actually that falls under your job description. Like if that's something you would like to do for your client, that would be great, but please don't ask me to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of building off of what we talked about today, I think that's part of why having priorities in a plan is
Got
helpful
it.
because it lets you articulate to people like, this is what we're doing,
Got it.
right? Like, and here's the process we went through to decide this, right? It wasn't just I randomly chose. It was actually a thoughtful process we put
Got it.
together, and we're super excited to be doing this work.
That makes
Right.
sense.
So,
Okay. No, I appreciate it a lot. Thank you. And this was a great training. So
oh, thank you.
I like how you can scale it up for large and down for
Mhm.
small, because that's where I struggle sometimes coming to these trainings is like, well, I can't. They're like, oh, get your marketing person involved. And I'm like,
Ooh.
what? So
Yeah,
I appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also designed to be like you could tackle this all in a month if you really wanted to, or you could stretch this out longer by taking it step by step. So that's why we kind of intentionally laid it out that way. All right. Well, I know that we are at our end. Devin, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to do to wrap up.
Just want to say thank you so much. This was so helpful, and we'll be posting the recording and sending follow-up information.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much for having us.
Thank
And we
you.
will hopefully see you all in office hours.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.